I want to get started. My name is Alex Kuskis. I'm a Canadian. I live in the Toronto area, and from there I teach for a university 3,000 miles away, which is Gonzaga. Have done. I've been a virtual professor for quite a number of years. So I'm very interested in the connection between media and education because I've mediated myself. We've got three presentations, so the three groups will go in the order of the listing, and you'll have up to 20 minutes each. And if you need a little bit more time beyond that, because we only do have the three presentations, feel free to take another couple of minutes beyond that. We'll hold the questions and comments until the end. So we'll get started first with a group from Florida Gulf Coast University. I've already heard one session. They were really great. And there are four presenters, and hand it over to you.
You might have to vamp for a few minutes while I figure out why this is locked up here.
High tech, low tech, I do it all.
All right. So we'll start with the low tech.
I'm Brandon Hollingshead. My colleagues are Miles Mancini, Victoria Hill, and Mary Cecile Galloso. And we're going to split up our presentation a little bit to tell you about our course, Themes in the Humanities, Everything is a Remix. So yesterday, they presented on another Themes in the Humanities class on the apocalypse. We have this as a blanket general education course where instructors can select a theme to meet shared course objectives. So I'm going to talk about our interpretation of the course, which focuses on media, art, and creation in the digital realm. So as the title of our paper suggests, Everything is a Remix, Teaching the Humanities, Cultural Production, Technology, and Copyright in the Age of Digital Reproduction. We address several aspects of teaching remix culture in our Gen Ed undergraduate humanities course. Of course, the title is a nod to Benjamin. One wonders what he would make of today's media landscape, the prevalence of digital tools and technology, and the democratization of digital artistic creation. In this talk and in our course, we address the humanities and humanistic work as what we call human cultural production. With our backgrounds in media ecology, environmental communication, media studies, we train our students to consider human cultural production through the lens of our university's Gen Ed competencies in critical thinking and in intercultural knowledge. Beyond simply consuming, studying, and commenting on media messages, we push our students to become creative producers in the course, working in collaborative learning environments and team-based learning scenarios. More on that in a minute. Remix culture at its core is a culture of producing derivative media from existing works through the process of copying, transforming, and combining existing work into new and innovative production. Consider, for example, William S. Burroughs' cut-up technique of creating poetry in the 50s. In the 50s and 60s, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones appropriating blues music. In the late 70s and into the 80s and up to the present, the culture of sampling and hip-hop music, and on and on. Outside of music, if you look at the top-grossing movies of 2014 and 2015, like the Age of Ultron, the new Avengers movie, which is a sequel of a movie that's based on a comic book, and some of the characters were developed to sell toys to kids and cartoons, and the 80s, kind of start to get the idea of looking at different media production, remixing derivative works, creating something new out of something that already exists. So how do we teach that in a humanities course? We've had 180 students, we've had 70 students in the last iteration. How do we actually teach remix culture? What do we actually do? How does this connect to critical thinking and intercultural knowledge? Well, what we do, looking at this kaleidoscope of community and kaleidoscope of media and remix culture, we emphasize collaborative and team-based learning, and we equip our students with theoretical and methodological approaches in different themes in the humanities. We call these the rules of the remix. So our first unit was on blues. We taught 12-bar chord progressions. Miles is a music educator and a longtime musician, so we had a jam session in class where he taught kids how to play the basics of the blues. So we call that background in the humanities kind of the rules of the remix. I lead a unit on visual art and photography, so we look at different styles of artwork, different styles of photography. So we get the background information first and foremost. And then, once we know the rules of the remix, we equip our students with certain tools of the remix. So in the blues, this would be things like the guitar, the piano, basic tools of cultural creation. So within the rules and the tools of the remix, then we ask our students to become creative producers themselves. So in employing the rules and tools of the remix, we move them from what Lawrence Lessig calls read-only media culture to what he calls read and write media culture. So moving from a culture of consumption only, read only, to a culture of creation, reading, remixing, copying and transforming, what he calls RW, read, write culture. This is a more robust media landscape where students are free to explore conventions and add their own creative dimensions. We utilize our own expertise and training to teach in different themes of the course, and this culminates in a unit on comics. And Miles will talk a little bit about the connection between comics and media ecology, in particular looking at some ideas of hot and cold and some of Postman's ideas on education and creativity and performance. So as creative producers, our students work to make their own works of art. And in the most recent iteration of the course that we just concluded in spring, we saw our students using the rules and the tools of the remix to create derivative messages and original messages based on all kinds of cultural ideas. So we saw really powerful projects connected to gender, sexual identity, to race and violence, especially in the context of police violence and the things we've been seeing in the news. Projects on ecological and animal welfare, and then some of the dissociation we're seeing through social media and technology. So I'll turn it over to Miles Mancini, who'll speak a bit more about the connections of media ecology, and then our course assistants, Victoria Hill and Mary Cecile Gayoso, will talk a little bit about our pedagogical choices and how we actually run the course.
So when we went into this course initially, developing this course and how we were going to put it together, the pieces of it together, Brandon talked a little bit about our backgrounds, and my background is in media ecology. And the latest iteration of the course, I thought quite a bit about Neil Postman and some of the works that I studied with Neil Postman's. And one of his books which came to mind as we were putting together the units of the course was The End of Education. And I love this quote. It's from the chapter where he talks about the fallen angel model of education, right? And he says that most teachers, especially high school and college teachers, teach subjects they were good at in school. They found the subject both easy and pleasurable. As a result, they're not likely to understand how the subject appears to those who are not very good at it or don't care about it, or both. Right? And so this really hit home in terms of when we were looking at the course and we're looking at elements that we would put into the course. So the first part of the course, we focused on the blues as a human cultural production. And so, yeah, I'll go back. And so the idea being we would lean on our expertise. And we found it to be, or at least I found it to be, a little frustrating. Not in the sense that I couldn't teach students the blues. That was the easy part of it. But I didn't feel that they were connecting with it, especially with our latest unit, the last unit of the course, the comics unit. Brandon had a similar feeling when he taught the visual unit of the course, which he's an expert in that area as well. But again, we didn't feel like the students' creative productions that they came up with which our student assistants are going to tell you a little bit about, that they were the same level that they created by the end of the course when we took on the comics. So, I thought about that quote from Postman. I thought about The End of Education, this idea of maybe we're falling into the trap of we're these experts and, it seems easy to us and our students are just like, what do we do? And we don't know what to do with it in a different frame of thinking. So we then moved over, if you can go to the next slide for me, we moved over to the comics unit of the course. This was the final unit of the course, and we leaned heavily on Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is a great work. It's a tricky book to read because it's all done in comic book form, and it's about comics. So it's reading a comic on how to interpret comics. So it was interesting to follow along that. This was probably the most challenging aspect of the course for us as teachers because we are not comic experts. We don't have any affiliation with creating comics, making comics, anything about it. So we came in pretty much with the same expertise and maybe in some ways less expertise than many of our students, because we had some talented artists in the class and things like that. So we leaned heavily on McLeod's understanding comics to engage the medium and make sense of how we could put pieces of it together. McLeod further introduced the students to the work of Marshall McLuhan. He has a lot of references throughout the book to McLuhan, and he talks about the medium of comics and how to read a comic properly. Right? And so this is actually a quote I think that speaks to understanding comics, and also how our students took that information and processed it and utilized it in their projects. So McLeod says, there lies a medium of communication and expression which uses closure like no other. A medium where the audience is a willing and conscious collaborator, and closure is the agent of change, time, and motion. See that space between the panels, and actually if we could bring the next slide up. The space between the panels. This is actually from Understanding Comics. That's what comics aficionados have named the gutter, space in between. Right? And despite its unceremonious title, the gutter plays host to much of the magic and mystery that are at the very heart of comics. So this idea that, you know, you see these panels, and I love this, you know, this is what he says, right? Every act committed to paper by a comic artist is aided and abetted by a silent accomplice. And you, the reader, are that silent accomplice, right? So you don't see, you see this guy wielding an axe saying, now you die, no, 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 and then the next thing you just see is scream in the background. There's no axe that comes down on the guy or anything like that, but we're putting those thoughts together, right? We fill in the blanks. So it was cool reading this book and reading it with our students and discovering how comics use that creativity and use that space, use that gutter. So we really encouraged for students to do that. Next slide, please. And so this brought up this idea of hot and cool media, which I know Mary Cecile is going to talk about as well. So McLeod does describe what McLuhan introduces, of course, as hot and cool media, and he gives kind of a continuum in the book of where comics fall, right? Literature on one side of the continuum, and comics not necessarily on the opposite end. Yes, there's visual imagery that's there, but it's not so stimulating that it doesn't require the reader to participate, right? So we know that cool media requires more participation, requires more engagement of the audience, and we'd say, well, a book is probably the highest level of that to some degree, but the comic book falls somewhere in between. It's not lumped with TV. You know, this is kind of a weird picture because TV and comics shouldn't be next to each other, right? Because comics would probably be somewhere in the middle of that continuum because it does require user engagement, and it does require students to be that read-write. So we also lean heavily, as Brandon was talking about, Lawrence Lessig's remix culture and the idea that we want to turn our students into read-write versus read-only, not just consumers of media, but actually creating the media that they're confronted with. So the final unit of the course culminated with student projects that all related to the comics. I'm going to turn things over to Victoria and Mary Cecile, who are going to talk about the student projects and what we saw in their actual progress in the class.
You can go to the next slide. So yeah, I'm Victoria, and we've heard a lot about this course and the way it's set up, but there's a very specific sequence in the way that we run things. Brandon mentioned earlier that we do require our students to be creative producers and work in teamworks. And this team-based learning approach is really effective in terms of them working together and figuring things out. We designed the teaching and the assignments to include 4 elements of successful team-based learning in the humanities. And those are readiness assurance, properly used permanent teams, peer evaluation, and application exercises. And this has been done through the assignments. So I'm going to kind of explain our assignments and the way that we abbreviate them so you can sort of follow along. But the course is broken up into 4 units. And each unit of the course begins with the students learning the basic theory behind the theme of the unit. They learn the rules and the tools, as Brandon was mentioning earlier, and how that relates to the humanities. And the lectures that we give were often paired with a film or a documentary so the students could see what we were kind of talking about in another form of media. And then we would design, activities to go along with the students to demonstrate these in action. We have remix challenges for the students to do, where they would do mini challenges in sort of a warm-up to their bigger assignments, which is the Creative Unit Project, or the CUP, as we like to call them, the CUPs. And in these CUPs, this comes at the end of each unit, after the students have really developed a solid foundation of knowledge on what they're talking about. And they're asked to create something and put something together. And after that, they're also required to evaluate each other, because we require the students to present their creative production to the class. So it's really interesting to see what all the students come up with, because they each take something like the comics or the blues and they create something completely different. And we ask the students to evaluate and pay attention to what each other are doing in the creative analysis report. And in the car, students have to demonstrate understanding of the creative choices employed by other groups. Why did the groups choose this medium? Why did they make these decisions? But they also have to identify the key features of the team's creative project, like connections to readings, lectures, films, documentaries, cultural artifacts, forms of expression, all of that. And finally, the unit will wrap up with an anonymous peer evaluation of the groups. And we find that this is a really effective way for the students not only to really look at what each other are bringing to the team, but we also ask them to critically look at themselves and think, what am I bringing to this group? What am I helping to add to our presentation? So over the course of the semester, it follows the same basic pattern through every unit, and I'm going to toss it to Mary Cecile, who will delve into a more specific unit of our course.
Okay, hi. So over the course of the entire class, the point is for the students to build knowledge. They come into the class not really knowing what this is all about. So we come into what Miles talked about, and the blues, and they're kind of confused. So their first project, their first cup in that section is it's just a test start. It's them getting the feel for the class. And then we come to the final project. And this is the comics. And this is the last section of the class that we teach. And you can notice how much the students have learned and gained from the class. This is a panel from one of the projects. This group made a comic about Calvin and Hobbes, except they changed it into a girl and into a lion instead of a boy and a tiger. So her name is Callie, and she and her lion friend go to Africa and they stop poachers. So it's this cute comic that also has a message about a social issue. So this group drew, this is just one panel, they drew many panels, an entire storyline. And in this project, other groups as well, they made comics. We had people even bake cakes. People make sculptures, make mosaics about social media. So it's not just students just doing something because, oh, they think it'll get them an A. They're actually thinking about what they have to do and how to be creative. So when you look at the progression of the students, I think that's the most impressive thing. They learn the tools. A lot of these students, they don't know how to make music. They don't know how to draw comics. But they come together and they find out their own strengths. They go, well, I'm good at art, kind of. So they come together and then they make something amazing using their own strengths in a unit that they may not know a lot about. And this section especially, Victoria and I gave lectures about gender identity, feminist theory, and you can see the students really talk about that in their final presentations. And you can see how they had absorbed all of that knowledge. And comics, especially, a lot of the students in the class, they didn't read comics, they didn't really know about comics. But by the end of the class, they were able to read all kinds of comics, American comics, comics from Japan. So they really got a breadth of knowledge that they didn't know before they had come into the class. And like Professor Mancini said before, the hot and cool thing. The reason why I think the comics section got all this participation and amazing effort in the project is because comics is so cool. It requires a lot of participation on part of the students. They can't just stare at it like they do a painting. They have to use the gutter. They have to use their imagination. So the comics unit really requires them to really focus and delve into the material itself. So critically, they have to think a lot. It's critical thinking. It's a lot of collaborative effort. They have to be able to transform the medium of comics into something brand new. Like I said before, it wasn't just everyone drawing comics. It was people making sculptures out of everyday items and people doing splatter paint to represent different emotions evoked by these comics. So overall, this section really showed the maturity level of the students and how they evolved over the course of the entire section. And that's why I think this is one of the most important sections of the class. because it really shows that. As you can see, I mean, this artist, she's not an artist. She just came together and decided to do this with her group. So this class is a really great experience for students to grow and to learn and to discover that maybe they're not creative, but they actually are creative. Everyone can be creative, and everyone has an artist inside of them. So I'll turn it back over to Victoria.
Kind of jumping off of that, the creativity we saw, in the beginning the students were sort of figuring it out. They're like, what is this remix idea? What does this mean to create something? And we saw throughout the course of the semester that as they were going on and figuring it out, the creativity and collaboration really dramatically improved. And so did their critical thinking. And that's something we all really wanted to look at, was to track and evaluate our students' critical thinking skills. It's really important. If we pull up the next slide for a minute, I'll explain this graph. So we start with 3 cups for each. We have a blues cup, a visual cup, a comic cup, and then cup 4 is a final cup where they, and I'll explain that in a bit. But as you can see, this is the average grades of students in the class, of every student in the class throughout the semester. And from the first cup, the average was a 77. And by the comics unit, the average was an 87. So that's a whole...
2 minutes.
Okay, that was a whole 10-point increase, which was pretty impressive. And at the end of the semester, I know a lot of universities use a student assessment of instruction. Ours is called Skye through campus, and students were asked to think about, did their creativity and critical thinking improve? They were asked if the course was effective in improving their critical thinking. 94% of our students either agreed or strongly disagreed, or strongly agreed, I mean. And the other 6% were neutral. So not one student in the class disagreed with the statement that we weren't effective with their critical thinking skills. So I'm going to let you all wrap it up. Thanks. Yep.
Okay, yeah, so to conclude, you can see that the grades have improved and that all the students, most of them agree that this class required them to think critically and required them to think outside of the box. So these students learned how to play instruments, they learned different forms of art, they learned different tools to use when making art, and overall they were just able to explore areas of themselves that they didn't know that they had before. The whole point of the class is to allow people to produce their own art and to be creative, even if they don't think they can do anything like that. So this class really gives that to those students, and the improvement shows. And it's a wonderful class because students have the opportunity to become an artist, a musician, a writer, a poet, a musician, whatever they want to be. So this class really can encourage students, I think. It can really encourage them in their creativity. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that a remix goes all the way back to Shakespeare and the medieval mystery plays that appropriated parts of the Bible. Next, we're going to have Ed Tywoniak from St. Mary's College of California, and he's going to talk about towards a contemporary media ecology curriculum.
And
So how you do this stuff in the classroom or online.
Give me just a second.
Okay. You need any help?
I think I got it here. It should work. Let's see. Yep, there we go. Cool. All right. We have, what, 20 minutes?
Yes.
All right, great. So I've been teaching for 40 years. Taught my first class in 1975. When I was 12. Thank you, Tom. And I'm just now learning how to teach after 40 years. And I mean by that, I'm learning how to get out of the way of learning. Maria, sitting out there watching your students come in yesterday and today and regale us with your wonderful presentations. This is what education is all about. And so thank you for, and your students for everything that you've been presenting so far. I'm going to do this very fast, and I'm going to run through some slides very quickly because it's a very large topic that dovetails directly to our plenary panel on theory and the role of theory and the question of theory within the curriculum of communication as well as in the philosophy of media ecology. I'm going to run through a lot of slides and visually show you what's been a 10-year trajectory of curriculum development at St. Mary's College. Tom's been a part of this as an outside observer years ago. It's actually quite a few years ago now. I presented at last MEA an exciting project on a digital humanities project that we got a large grant for from the Keck Foundation. We're at the end of that project, and so that's another piece of this. How do we migrate the concept of teaching theory online in the 21st century? So again, I'm going to run through this very quickly and try to map out for us what I think are the three essential key questions that came out of our conversation yesterday in the plenary session. That's the question of context, for which I look at figure and ground in particular. And I think one thing that was a little bit overlooked that Alex and I were talking about on the shuttle coming over here, and that's that McLuhan and Postman were really educators first and foremost. And that's going to be under the foundation of this as we go through. So to begin with, St. Mary's College, our Department of Communication, has a core curriculum that is somewhat unique to us only because we're a liberal arts Catholic college on the West Coast, and that contextualizes everything. So how we extrapolate out to the real world, I'm going to try to keep this generic enough so it's applicable to any program and any question of theory within curriculum. So we start out with the question of theory, and in that conversation yesterday, we really got into the question of context, and that became a foundational concept that ran through a lot of the presentations yesterday, and we can think back on that later on. But context is at the heart of this project, and again, I mentioned already the digital studies program that we have going through the Keck Foundation, which is a whole other exciting piece of this. So what I gleaned from yesterday was that when we think of the question of how we teach theory, not what is theory, but how we teach it, there's practical experiential learning kinds of questions, there's the survey of the discipline, and there's also the meta-theoretical questions that all have to somehow be addressed, and we do try to address that in our theory course. So our curriculum is split up into 3 lower division required courses, 4 upper division required, and 4 upper division electives. We, again, are a liberal arts Catholic college. For 150 years, we've been teaching a core curriculum that the last 70 years has been grounded in the Seminar Great Books program, as founded by Mortimer Adler and his Paideia project at the University of Chicago. He came out to St. Mary's College in 1941 and founded the Great Books program at St. Mary's. So we are a direct descendant from the original liberal arts project as developed by Mortimer Adler and John Dewey. We also have a strong social justice component. That was a big thing yesterday, and again in the plenary session, and that's at the core of what we do, in large part because of our Catholic and De La Salle Christian Brother Lasallian heritage. That goes back over 300 years. And we're the sister institution to Manhattan College, where Tom is at. And then we also are proposing an MA in communication coming up soon, an intercultural communication that dovetails into this Catholic component, or Lasallian component here, and we're part of a worldwide network of some 50, 60 Lasallian colleges and universities around the country, so this has a large scope to it. And our little theory course has to address all of these things across this curriculum and all of this stuff as well. So we really had to think hard about this. So our 3 lower division courses, even these are kind of unique in terms of they're not called the basic course, etc. Communication and social understanding, communication inquiry, argument and advocacy on the lower division. Upper division, theory, a quantitative research class, a qualitative research class, and a capstone project course. Now when you look at these, again, theory is right in the middle of that, and it's supposed to bridge all of this horizontally. Not all curricula is based on this, but we really try to strive for horizontal coherency across this. So in thinking about that, when we look at what we have to teach in theory in the lower division, we have to teach vocabulary through vocabulary book projects. We have to teach the media, what you're calling remix. We teach here, and we also teach here. In this course, we're teaching 4 concepts: identity, authenticity, culture, technology. And this is all rhetorical dialectic. How do you develop an argument? How do you defend it, etc. On the upper division, we teach statistical, empirical stuff, SPSS, content analysis, ethnographies, and all that stuff. And then at a capstone, they have to then either do a thesis or some sort of media project that they then use their upper division electives to dovetail into that. And again, theory has to somehow train them for all of that stuff. We have to train them on terms and themes, ways of knowing, theory construction, disciplinary writing. We have to teach them how to do APA formatting and all that stuff. Plus, we have to have a student-centered pedagogy. All right? That's a whole lot to cram into one course. So how do we do it? So we start out with first a survey. We do all 3 things. We do the survey approach, we do the meta-theoretical approach, as well as the practical approach. We use the Weston Turner book on the survey of theoretical models, for which we march through some 30 theories. It's like the Bataan Death March. Self and messages, relationship development. You can see all the theories that we do underneath this. Uncertainty reduction theory, social penetration theory, on and on and on. Here, under the media module, rests our dear friend media ecology theory. Okay? Cool. All right? So what I do is I take this out, and that's the whole first 2 weeks of the course. All right? I also use this to show them how poorly a survey overview of theory is. Because, for example, in the rhetoric, there's exactly 1 sentence from Aristotle in the whole chapter. Okay? So, yet there's a brief mention of Neil Postman here. Brief. Okay? This is basically a McLuhan study kind of thing, and they didn't even get him remotely correct. Okay? No offense to Richard and Karen. Okay? So what I do then is supplement this with all of these supplemental readings. From Corey Anton through Aristotle, it's a long list and it continues to grow. But it's kind of a who's who of stuff that people need to be exposed to. And I give it to them in sound bites. We read very little of any of these. I just extract out the nuggets. Okay, and we'll get into the pedagogy of how this is used in a minute. I'm really conscious of time. So Weston Turner on page 28 give us 7 traditions. Before I get into this, I'm going to switch modes here for a second and give you a little bit of a glimpse into the pedagogy. How are we doing time-wise here?
You got 12 minutes.
Good. We're right on schedule here. Whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. Right? So here is our online site. Okay, so we're experimenting a lot with online stuff. This is the most boring part, but it's a good example. By the way, this is on, I put this picture up here. I took this in Egypt in 2010. That's the Library of Alexandria. Notice there's no books here. It's all computer terminals. It's a good metaphor for this course. Thank you very much. Hang on, let me just do this, see if this does anything. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So here, under course documents, you see I have a few things here, including some stuff about Postman, Neil Postman's media ecology address and whatnot. But more importantly, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of stuff here. Here's all of our writing in the discipline. This is a whole major thing, and this is a pretty cool thing that we're doing here. But then we have related web links. Here's IGS, here's the Media Ecology Association, etc. So there's this whole virtual linkage thing that we do. But then here's all of our theories, okay? Social penetration theory, relational dialectics theory. So the class is split up into groups. It's a lecture course, but the students do all the lecturing. And they do all the lecturing for this stuff. They do the PowerPoint presentations, the videos, all that cool stuff. And then all of those secondary readings they have to look at, and then they have online asynchronous seminars. So let's just randomly pick uncertainty reduction theory. You get into here. And now you see the student who posts the first question gets the most points, and then everyone is responding asynchronously. So there's constant dialogue going on each day about all of these contextual readings that are actually core readings. Real Aristotle, real Plato, etc., not the survey stuff, okay? And they love it because they have to put a quote from a text, they have to argue and defend for it, and they also have to address what other people talk about. So there's a whole built-in pedagogy within this itself. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we do here online to make this work in, as we try to cram in as much stuff as we can. Okay? So, moving along, as we get into Weston Turner, page 28, early on in the book, they give us this model of the 7 traditions in the communication field. And what I do is I use this to center media ecology. I start with phenomenology, about the sensate self, how it's about the here and now. All of Corey's wonderful phenomenological Merleau-Ponty Heidegger stuff resides right there. We move from that through symbols, rhetoric, critical thought. We get larger with socio-psychological, socio-cultural, and eventually end here in cyberspace, where we then begin to phenomenologically loop back together and ask, where are you when you're doing this at any given moment? So it's kind of a complete model that Weston Turner gives us if you analyze it this way, because what it does is, again, this is from page 5, it allows us to, again, this is their work that I am interpreting. It then allows us to use environments, symbols, and processes to construct social meaning. I bring those together, bring in McLuhan, Korzybski, Postman, Ellul, and others to give them this framework for understanding the environment of social construction through symbols and processes. Media ecology, okay? It's the study of reality, okay? So then I move from that into the heart of media ecology. I start with the 4 horsemen, those guys and those guys. No explanation needed. Everyone else here is important, but these are probably the guys, right? We need a few more women up here, I guess, but right now we have the 4 guys. When I present this, there we go. When I talk about McLuhan, and again, this is in the first couple of weeks of the course that they're getting this context. I start with the figure and ground, and I've got these great examples that I use, these little projects. Most important one, I guess, is when I have them talk about, put them in groups, and they talk about, I guess the first thing I have them do is draw a symbol, and they have a big piece of paper and crayons, and they make symbols, and they have to make a group project and describe their symbols. Then they have to photograph it and then send it to me, and then they stand up and talk about their symbols. They show the representations, and then we show the re-representations here on the screen, and each step of the way ask about layers of abstraction. And does this represent what's on the piece of paper? Does what's on the piece of paper represent this? Okay. Another thing that I do is the Reese's Pieces candy thing, where I slowly have them unwrap the Reese's Pieces and smell it and touch it and all this stuff, and they have to write down all these notes before they eat it. And it's the idea of, you never think about this stuff until you're focused, you know. This is not a symbol of anything, it's just a finger. And once it goes away, it recedes back into the background. So this becomes a core thing. Formal cause, deep philosophy, the medium is the message, global village, that all comes there. Follow it up with technopoly, Postman's whole look at liberal arts and humanities. Obviously, Alfred Korzybski is a large part of symbolic abstraction. The map is not the territory, etc. And then I show them the clip of Neil Postman at St. Mary's College in 1996, which we have just now digitized several weeks ago, and are going to make available on the MEA website through the YouTube link very shortly. But this was given right after Technopoly, and it's a wonderful thing that it's just brilliant. He ties this whole thing together in a whole lot of nice ways. And so just to recap, our theory, which is right in the middle of this whole horizontal trajectory, becomes a vertical way of understanding from a media ecology perspective, digital humanities, all of this stuff, but also has this whole horizontal trajectory across here. And as we move towards putting this online, I'm continually asking, would Postman approve of what we're doing? And I think at the end of the day, the answer is yes. He'd be pretty thrilled. The bugaboo is always in assessment, though. It is their real student learning here. And that's a whole other piece that we spent a lot of time working on, and we have answers to that, too. So here's my final slide. And the kaleidoscope is the thing, the focus of this conference. So I was just dorking around 2 nights ago. But I put this image together. That's my story, and I'm sticking by it. Thank you very much. Right on time, right?
Oh, I know you're ahead of time.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's do it right now.
So our final presenter is John Nicholson. John Nicholson from Mississippi State, and he's going to be talking on media ecology, message design logic, and STEM, analysis, interpretation, and speculation.
Thank you. Thank you all. I am concerned that my presentation might be a little bit unusual based on what you may have come prepared for. I am going to preach a little bit to you, but preach that you might become missionaries, but missionaries in a cause that I think you already believe in. I'm hoping that maybe I can point you to what some people might call a mission field that is ripe for media ecology and for media ecologists and for communication philosophers and theorists. And so the problem that I want to direct our attention towards today is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and the lack of representation of both women and other minorities except Asians. And that's actually the federal government's definition of who are the people that they want to recruit into STEM. And quite literally hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in, thank you, have been invested in trying to recruit more women and underrepresented minorities into STEM. And on social justice grounds alone, this should be a project that we all care about. That if in fact there is in our society more money, more prestige, more stability, in many ways how we in the West think about life, happiness, and success, the STEM track provides that. And yet we have entire communities of people, quite literally half of the population of the planet, that would be women, who are not, as a population in our culture, encouraged and directed. Could I get that clicker thingamadoodle? It's right.
Hang on, let me
That'd be
this
great.
on.
Thank
See
you.
if it all fits in there. I think it should work. And it's the lower right one. Let's see what
Yes,
happens.
thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.
There it goes.
Okay, so
Oh.
why would someone choose a STEM career? Actually, let me go back and say one more thing. This is a better title. Underrepresentation of women in STEM, a solution based on media ecology and message design logic. This paper is largely my writing, but I do have 2 other people working with me. Steve Duck of the University of Iowa and Skye Cooley of Mississippi State University. And this is an ongoing project of ours. So why would anyone choose a STEM career? Prestige, respect, affirmation, it's challenging work, compensation, security, lifestyle. Also, if one is individually gifted, it's sort of why would you play football or basketball? Well, if you're 7 feet tall, maybe you play basketball, right? It's a gift. Preparation, and then also fit. And fit becomes an important issue here. So why wouldn't a woman or a member of one of these communities choose a STEM career? And the answer is, in one case, stereotypes, that there are negative stereotypes of women in STEM careers, but also of all people. There are educational course tracking concerns where people say if you are not on a STEM career path by 6th grade, it may be too late. That's not actually true. If you are simply high school educated, you can get on a STEM track. Do you have a taller hill to climb? Absolutely. This is new territory. But it can be climbed. But that also becomes an issue. Absence of specific encouragement. You know, if someone says or does not say, why don't you consider this, then perhaps you never consider it. I mean, exactly what your presentation was about. Let us take attention and pay attention. Right? Let's take this moment and look at it. So then also absence of models. A modeling theory plays into that. And then also it's an alien community to many. It's someone else's community where they feel like they're interloping, and then you get things like the pretender syndrome for women who do choose to participate, where they pretend as if they belong, but they never in fact feel like they do. And then also a perceived or real lack of individual giftedness. Some people simply cannot, through the processes that we know, acquire certain skills. And then perceived or real preparation or lack thereof. And then finally a lack of fit. Right? People are choosing because they don't fit. And this is where it ties to my personal story. I started out as an engineering student. And one semester in, I looked around a room of 40 people sitting at drafting tables, 2 women, and I said, these are good people, these are nice people, but these are not my people. And I went to a communication class and I found my people. But the idea of fit was so clear to me in that moment. I was capable of doing the work. I was prepared. I had been modeled. All of those things, but this was not my community. So let me ask this. Why was that not my community? What was happening with those people that made them somehow alien to me? Someone who had grown up in high school classes with people just like that. In fact, there was a person in that class that graduated high school with me. Well, what are some of the stereotypes of STEM jobs? That they're dull and boring. Hey, let's do some engineering. You know, that doesn't happen. Of who is good at math, science, technology, and engineering. And we have the stereotypes of girls not wanting to stand out, especially once they hit age 11, 12, 13, and physical attractiveness becomes more important. Intelligence seems to become less important, or at least a different type of intelligence. Nerds and eggheads model. There are stereotype activation studies that show that women perform less proficiently on math exams if you simply ask them if they are male or female at the beginning of the test. If you wait until the end, their scores are more commensurate with the males. So the issue there is that you're a woman, and in your brain you have the idea that women are not good at math, and that gets activated. And of course that happens in other areas, the geekdom and the nerddom, right? If you are made aware of your geekdom and nerddom, all of the negative stereotypes and the positive come with you. That's part of the power of privilege, right? Is that comes with. There are draw a scientist studies where you hand out a sheet of paper to folks and you say, draw a scientist. And if you do that to almost any audience, I did this to an audience of 20 women engineers. 0 women scientists were drawn. They draw either characters that could not be identified as male or female, or male scientists, which again is revealing the stereotype, not creating it. Okay, so of women as objects, of women and minorities as others. So throw one woman in a room with 20 engineers and she feels weird, even if she's prepared, even if she's welcomed, even if people want her to be a part. And then of women in STEM, we found that when you put STEM versus non-STEM labels on the same images, that the women become 25% less attractive when they are STEM titles. Actually 20%, it's a 5-point scale, 1 full point lower, right, in attractiveness. All other things being held equal, which means that so if you're an attractive, capable, thoughtful woman, why would you want to be an engineer? If there are other careers available that are going to reward some of those characteristics. So the big question is this: are STEM and non-STEM people fundamentally different? That's the important question that we have to ask, I believe. And the answer is we think so, or I think so, depending. So here are some of the differences where we want to measure STEM and non-STEM populations. These are from applied communication. Some may not believe in them, but they are validated instruments, and they are showing us something. But verbal aggressiveness and assertiveness, rhetorical sensitivity, emotional intelligence, calm apprehension, communication stress response, and message design logic, which will be the focus of the next few minutes. Now, message design logic explores and explains these differences in message production and effectiveness. Message design logic was developed by O'Keefe, and essentially it's the idea that people can think about and use communication very differently with media ecology. That in fact, where some people may think of communication as a tool as simple as a hammer, that if they get in a conversation with somebody who thinks of communication as paints and paintbrushes, that's a really interesting conversation. Hammer versus paintbrush. What gets built? What gets accomplished? What gets constructed? And so what you have, quite literally, are different philosophies of communication that are manifest through their message design logic, that are both manifest and that create this message design logic. So O'Keefe 88, it's a theory of these ways that people constitute communication processes. Again, how they think and enact. So message design logic is based on message use and production and thought. She has three categories: the expressives, conventionals, and rhetoricals. And I'll take a minute and talk to you about each. And according to O'Keefe, and this is O'Keefe, I'm not necessarily believing, but I sort of see it. She argues that the expressive communication model is the least sophisticated, that then over time we can develop and become conventionals. Then as we learn more social norms and rules and communication practices, we can become rhetorical. So she argues for a developmental perspective. I disagree with that because I have one child who was born in expressive and one child who was born in rhetorical. And quite literally, as soon as they got command of symbols, it was made manifest. So I'll credit to her for the idea. I disagree with that particular part of it. So expressives, these folks use communication to simply express their thoughts and feelings. These are the people who see words as like Lego blocks. Just put them together and there you go. They say what they think and they use talk and words to accomplish that. So talk is good and efficient as it reveals what they are thinking and feeling. And talk and communication is less worthy, less really good from an expressive's perspective if it, for example, conceals certain thoughts, doesn't truly reveal the depth of one's anger or frustration. So the Ron test was developed by O'Keefe. It's a hypothetical that says you're in a class with Ron. Ron has been a loser on the group project. The group project's critical. Ron said he'd do this and he dropped the ball once before. Ron volunteered to make up for it by doing something else. The group has to get together tomorrow. Ron has just called you and says he doesn't have his work. What do you say to Ron? Everybody's group is so what they've created is an interdependent scenario where people have to communicate with one another, and there are rules, and it's within the construct of a class and a class assignment and their teachers. But I want to show you for each of these three message design logics, actual responses to the Ron test. Okay, so this was one. So this is write what you would say to Ron. So these are supposed to be spoken words. So it says, Ron, I know you're having problems, but everyone has problems. That's the whole message to Ron. The other one is next, we don't need your help. Somebody else will take care of the research and don't bother coming to the meeting either. Get it done, man. That was one. And then finally another, thanks a lot, Ron. So these are folks that communication, just here's what I'm feeling, boom, there it is. The conventionals use communication as part of a cooperative game. So these are people who are now playing roles. Not pretending, but enacting, right? With rules and contextual features that shape what is said and how it is said. So now appropriateness comes into play. Okay? By the way, as an expressive, think Archie Bunker, or think Cartman from South Park. Anybody who says, I don't want to offend anybody, but... that's often an expressive. Now, a conventional wrote, you specifically volunteered to do this research for our next meeting, and you really need to find time to do it. If you can't, that's fine, but we still have a few days before it's due, but I can promise that I'll be very generous with your evaluation. So I guess you can either work on your part or bring it to the meeting or not get a good grade. So this person here's the construct, right? They're speaking into the context and the moment. All of their talk is about the rules and the structure, and that's where they get what it is that they say and want to say. The next one, I'm sorry, Ron, but we need that done tomorrow. If you can't get it done, we'll have to ask you to be removed from the group and redelegate because this grade is too important for the whole group. So again, it's not that they don't care at all about Ron, it's that this is it's about the group, it's about me, it's where they are. Okay? The interesting thing here is the politeness norms of I'm sorry. That it's sort of I'm going to hit you with a hard message, but I'm going to soften it a little bit. And again, so here we see people paying attention to politeness norms to accomplish this, not just simply, Ron, you're dropping the ball, get it done, which is what the expressive says. So what do the rhetoricals do? And I'm betting most of us in the room, if we're not rhetoricals, we know and love some. Okay? Rhetoricals use communication as the instrument to construct, manage, negotiate, and recreate reality and realities. It's often a relationally focused type of communication. So here's a rhetorical. By the way, are you noticing how much longer the responses get? So, get it done, Ron, is an expressive. A rhetorical says, Ron, I wanted to express some concerns that myself and the group are having about your participation in the group project. I understand that you may have some outside issues going on, but please let me know if I need to help pick up the slack so we can get a good grade, or if you're willing to balance what's going on to get your part of the job done. I know the project is not your first priority at the moment, but you have other members depending on you for a good grade. Wordy is what some of us might call that, but some of us might also say it's very sensitive to Ron. Ron is a person. Ron is a human being, not just Ron within the context of this. It's okay, this project is due next week. We have plenty of time to get together and help finish that. Family problems can be rough, and I don't blame you if this school project is the least of your worries right now. So they're literally altering reality. Hey, the center is not the project, and they're trying to do that. Okay, so MDL speculations. Does the expressive logic fit STEM logic? Think about what STEM is: science, technology, engineering, and math. You can be the big, I'm going to say a few bad words, you can be the biggest asshole in the world, but if you've got the right answer in math class, that's an A. All day long. Same is true in science. And so what you've got is a model that says that all that is important is being right. Okay? That fits the expressive logic already, philosophically. Now let's take it one step further. Nerds and geeks, let's call that something else. Let's call that social skill deficient. That these are folks who don't necessarily, they're often introverts as opposed to extroverts. They have not emphasized or been taught particular interpersonal skills. And so what you've got now are literally decades, if not centuries, of these types of men with no intention of doing so, creating an inhospitable world, not just to women, but to anybody who doesn't share that message design logic and who is not capable of enduring that sort of treatment by and with people in those sorts of relationships. Where we do see women going into more STEM careers, counselors, psychologists, vets, primary care physicians. So where we see women showing up in STEM in greater numbers are those that seem to have a human, caring dimension. And I think the lack of caring in the talk of STEM professionals, in part because of what they do, but in part because of the culture that they've created as an elaboration of that's part of the problem. And so, how can we engage that? So the expressive logic may not allow the management of face concerns. One respondent, Ron, you're getting an F. Wow, that's really a tough thing for most people to say to another person. But expressives may not have that trouble. The conventional logic deals with, again, politeness norms and manages face. And the rhetorical negotiates realities with language. So, do STEM community members have differences? I think so. Are those differences connected to skill deficiencies? For example, a reliance on the verbal and on the explicit, which, if you look at Goleman's emotional intelligence, he argues that essentially being a good relational partner is being able to read and make sense of non-verbally what your partner is doing. And if you are never looking at your partner because you're an introvert, if you're not looking at your partner because it frightens you to do so, then we are going to have difficulty building a deep and warm relationship, much less a culture that's inviting to people who are different. And then, are there different MDLs? I just came from a convention with engineering women. These are women administrators, professors, and the women engineers are not the same as the male engineers. This is just my experience, it's not a fact. But these are women who could have done anything, and that's who ends up in engineering. The women who say, I can do anything and I want to do engineering. But women who walk in with a skill set to do engineering, who then find it inhospitable, will make a decision about whether or not they want to stay. There's STEM recruitment, getting them in. There's retention, keeping them through the program. And then there's persistence, which is even after they graduate, keeping them in the career. 50% of the women engineers, after 10 years, are not practicing engineers. These are not people who didn't get recruited. These are not people who didn't get in the track. These are not people who couldn't do the work. These are people who found an inhospitable environment and who got pushed out. Now, they may have found a better career path, but should they have had to? This is a social justice issue. It's not one that we feel very profoundly, because for most of us, we're not STEM people, and, maybe one of our kids are, and that makes a difference to us. But ultimately, I believe that communication is the key here, and that I think it has to be multi-pronged, and it's going to take a long time, but we have to deal with the educators, we have to deal with the students, and we have to deal with the practicing professionals. And I believe that for people interested in media ecology and interested in the philosophy of communication, that there are more problems like this outside of engineering is where I'm really focusing. But there are so many different career paths and fields within STEM, and so many people, and so much support for it. So even if we can take our philosophy of communication work, which often is not funded by grants, we can, if that's an important thing to us, find a way to find financial support for us, but also to address a critical social issue with the work that we do. So, thank you.